Because I speak to the victims. I spoke to some of the victims of grooming gangs this morning. I will speak to some more tomorrow. I have spoken to them from Oxford, from Birmingham, from Rochdale, from Rotherham, from Oldham. I know exactly the issue of the cover-up, as does everybody already, because of the many local inquiries that have told us that this happened, and the national inquiry that has told us that there were cover-ups. What we must focus on is making sure, like happened in Telford, that there is a local process of accountability that actually changes things on the ground, and that is what I will do. I have been trying to change the issue of this on the ground for all of my life. Since the very first time I ever met a girl who had been ignored, I will continue to do that and do what is right for the victims.
Jess Phillips chokes up in Parliament, desperately trying to dodge calls for a full-blown national inquiry into one of the worst scandals in British history. Meanwhile, Tory MPs are exposing the ugly cover-up that officials still refuse to admit. Welcome back to the channel that tells it like it is. Today, the House of Commons was on fire, and you won't believe the excuses being thrown around. Smash that subscribe button if you're sick of cover-ups and want real accountability. The fury erupted during an urgent question in the House of Commons over the grooming gang scandal, a national disgrace that's shattered public trust. The Home Office proudly claimed
the child grooming scandal.
We are pressing ahead with key recommendations of the independent inquiry, including the mandatory duty to report. Baroness Kate.
They boasted about audits, reviews, and support for local inquiries, saying,
"Our focus is on delivering meaningful, tangible change for victims and survivors. That means delivering..."
But many MPs, victims, and families weren't buying it, not after years of betrayal. When Jess Phillips stood to speak, emotions ran high. She insisted.
I speak to the victims. I spoke to some of the victims of grooming gangs this morning. I will speak to some more tomorrow. I have spoken to them from Oxford, from Birmingham, from Rochdale, from Rotherham, from Oldham. I know exactly the issue of the cover-up, as does everybody.
But others had a brutal reality check ready, and they weren't letting the government off the hook that easily. Jess Phillips tried to calm the storm by repeating that local inquiries are enough.
Ensure, like happened in Telford, that there is a local process of accountability that actually changes things on the ground, and that is what I will.
She portrayed herself as a lifelong fighter for the victims.
Change the issue of this on the ground for all of my life. Since the very first time I ever met a girl who had been ignored, I will continue to do that and do what is right.
But her refusal to back a national statutory inquiry drew massive anger. Chris Phelps MP demanded answers, reminding Parliament of shocking failures.
The rape gang scandal. Thousands of young teenage girls systematically raped over years by men of predominantly Pakistani heritage. Girls like Jane, who was repeatedly gang raped at the age of just 12. The police found her being abused by an illegal immigrant, but instead of arresting the illegal immigrant, they arrested her. That is sick. The last government took action by setting up the wider J inquiry and the grooming gangs task force, but the truth is that is not enough. There is now clear evidence that those in authority covered up these.
Despite this horrifying cover-up, Jess clung to the idea that local answers would be enough. The defense looked weak, evasive, and disconnected from the public rage. The reality is brutal. Thousands of teenage girls were systematically raped, abused, and trafficked, and the state stood by. One MP recalled the horror.
Heritage. Girls like Jane, who was repeatedly gang raped at the age of just 12. The police found her being abused by an illegal immigrant, but instead of arresting the illegal immigrant, they arrested her. That is sick.
That's not just negligence, that's systematic betrayal. And yet, as Chris Phelps pointed out,
person, not one, has ever been held to account for these cover-ups. That is why we need a national statutory public inquiry which can compel.
He slammed the government's empty promises, highlighting the broken deadlines.
To participate. Now, Mr. Speaker, The Home Secretary promised on the 16th of January that Baroness Casey would complete a rapid audit within 3 months. Well, 3 months has now passed, and we have heard nothing whatsoever. Almost there. The
Families of victims are begging for justice. Marlon West, whose daughter was trafficked and raped, said
this government should be ashamed of themselves and they should hold a national inquiry.
even Labour figures like Andy Burnham, Harriet Harman, and the MP for Rotherham are demanding a national inquiry. Still, Jess Phillips stubbornly pushed local inquiries, while real victims demand the full truth exposed once and for all. Chris Phelps dropped the hammer when he exposed the continued failures, not just in the past, but right now. He told Parliament
This month that he had been sidelined by the minister over there and, quote, did not know what was going on. Now finally, Mr. Speaker, I recently met Marlon West, whose daughter was trafficked, abused and raped by mainly Asian men, including in Bradford. He said also wants a statutory national inquiry. Labour Mayor Andy Burnham, Harriet Harman and the Labour MP for Rotherham all agree. They and Marlon and Jane are all begging for and hold that national inquiry so those who covered up that scandal.
this isn't some minor localized problem. It's a national disgrace on an unprecedented scale, and yet the Home Office is still pushing tiny local inquiries, knowing full well they can't compel evidence, can't bring the perpetrators and those who covered for them to justice. The reality is clear. The victims are being failed again. The moment that truly crushed Jess Phillips' defense came when the facts lined up against her emotional pleas. Chris Phelps threw it back in her face.
The man charged with setting them up, Tom Crowther, said to the Home Affairs Committee on the 1st of this month that he had been sidelined by the minister over there and, quote, did not know what was going on. Now finally,
That's right, resignations, because local inquiries were still hiding evidence. He didn't stop there. Imagine that, entire council stonewalling investigations years after the truth came out. And despite Jess Phillips' emotional pleas, Chris Phelps reminded everyone, the man in charge of setting up the inquiries, sidelined and left in the dark, chaos, incompetence, betrayal, and Jess Phillips herself couldn't deny that real victims were demanding a national inquiry.
Spoken to them from Oxford, from Birmingham, from Rochdale, from Rotherham, from Oldham. I know exactly the issue of the cover-up, as does.
She admitted the horror, admitted the cover-ups, yet still refused the one thing victims are pleading for: full national accountability. Even Richard Tice brutally pointed out
For Oldham Council, who actually specifically requested a national inquiry, she said she's going to focus on delivering meaningful change.
Jess Phillips can choke up all she wants, but tears aren't justice. The victims deserve more than token inquiries. They deserve truth, accountability, and real action. If you're as outraged as we are, make sure you smash that subscribe button, because we're not letting them sweep this under the rug. We'll keep exposing the lies they want you to forget. Stay tuned, stay angry, stay fighting.